Good morning, YouTube land. I wanted to discuss an issue that's very much been in the news in the UK here. Last few days, in that we seem to have an explosion of riots in various inner cities right across the country. Rotherham being specifically mentioned, but in many other locations. Here in Ipswich, we apparently don't do that sort of thing. So Ipswich has been, safe. Apparently, I haven't heard anything. I mean, there's been scuffles probably on the estates or whatever, but so I'm quite grateful for anyone who is living in areas of the UK where this is happening. Stay safe. And it seems to me that our current Prime Minister, newly elected, is blaming it all on far-right extremism without looking at the mitigating factors. Not making excuses, these people are violent, horrible thugs. Okay, let's get that right there now. And he is right, there is no excuse for that kind of behaviour. But there are mitigating factors that need to be looked at. He is using these riots for a political agenda. Well, he's a politician, of course he is, but I just want people to be aware. You cannot just blame something as complex as this on one single issue to suit your needs. Right, as far back as the 1980s and even the late 1970s, I believe, in this country, there has been a long history of rioting, usually during a long spell of heat wave or just a really long hot spell. Normally in times of recession and austerity, but there is always some spark. In this case, the spark seems to have been the horrific events in Stockport in the UK, where somebody basically went berserk with a knife and ended the lives of many people and wounded many more. Apparently a lot of online bullshit was spread about the motivations and race of the attacker. But I just think he was a person with extreme mental health issues. So his race shouldn't actually be a factor. He was UK born apparently as well, so he wasn't an immigrant. Let's get that bullshit out of the way because this was being spread. What you basically had is a lot of lawless, nasty people using this as an excuse to break the law and in their own nasty way let off some steam because they only have 2 brain cells and can't think of anything else to do. That having said, of course, far-right extremists with their own agenda are going to piggyback on this, use it as an excuse for their own particularly vile brand of lawlessness. Of course they are. I've no doubt mixed in there somewhere there were probably left-wing revolutionaries as well, because they are going to piggyback onto it. But definitely in this country, the far-right extremism is much more prevalent than the far left at the moment, I think. I've certainly heard nothing about far left involvement in these riots. This is something that happened in the 1980s quite a lot. But at least then, when it was more balanced between far left and far right extremists, there was always the possibility they'd notice each other and then turn on each other and leave the civilians the fuck alone, wasn't there? You know, feel free, beat the shit out of each other, please. You know, that might make entertainment worth filming, as long as nobody gets in the firing line. But unfortunately, the very underfunded and I think undervalued police of this country have to put themselves in the firing line in these situations. And you then have the age-old thing where those with a lack of education will hate the police because they represent the authority they somehow think they're fighting against. You want to fight against the government, don't blame the poor bugger in uniform just trying to do his job. Blame the people in power. Sign petitions. Protest in an orderly fashion outside the Houses of Parliament or outside your local MP's office. Because doing this kind of shit, if you do have a political agenda, it just gets you lamped in with the red-faced, shaven-headed, beer-bellied, England shirt-wearing, Carlsberg super strength. For reference, Carlsberg super strength in this country, mostly aimed at my American audience, it's a hideously strong lager beer that tastes vile. It's a bit like syrup, and I think it's about, 7 or 8%, isn't it?
Yeah.
Yeah. And, blazing hot sunshine, these idiots will drink cans of this to stoke themselves up. Because apparently they're too afraid to actually do this kind of shit without a bit of Dutch courage. It's an interesting phrase. Apparently, it was an English phrase invented to mean that the Dutch couldn't fight without, alcohol inside them. I mean, and this is actually psychologically true of most people. Most people do not react in a truly aggressive manner unless they've been drinking. I'm exactly the same. This is why I do not, especially when I'm feeling stressed and angry, go out drinking at night. I don't feel safe from people being aggressive, and I don't think people are safe from me being aggressive should they provoke me. So don't go out at night. I mostly drink late afternoon. My only experience of this kind of behaviour has been a very civilised protest 2 or 3 years ago now, in support of the National Health Service of this country. And when I was about 16, 17, narrowly avoiding getting involved in the poll tax riots that happened in London. We were bloody lucky. We saw things start. And at one point I got threatened by a copper with his baton, because police in this country do not generally have guns unless there is reports of someone with a gun or other weapon. This is how it works in this country. Our police are generally not armed. Even in Ipswich, which is, I would say, relatively quiet. It is rare, but it is seen. I remember an incident a year ago where I believe someone was stabbed in an altercation not 10 minutes from my house. And I was seeing, 3 or 4 coppers standing around with, I think, probably not Heckler and Koch MP5s, but weapons, the modern equivalent of submachine guns. And it's a sight I've seen before. Many years ago, there was a bomb threat on the Liverpool Underground, and there were coppers standing around with those kind of weapons then. I mean, I'm enthusiastic about all manner of weaponry, so it doesn't really bother me, because I'm not going to, throw a stone at a copper who's got a gun, because I'm not stupid. I'm more likely to wander around and go, oh, all right, mate. Back on subject, because I'm as bad as the great Simon Whistler for going off on a tangent. You see, what Starmer isn't mentioning here is the fact that for decades now, our inner cities have been crumbling and collapsing due to neglect, underfunding, poverty, drugs, and the general lack of self-respect and respect for their environment and community that many people have these days. I see it in Ipswich. We have the symptoms here. People just dropping their trash in the street when there's a bin 15 yards away. I have been known to get involved in that. Normally by forcefully and very passively aggressively striding over, picking up said litter, making sure they notice it, putting it in the bin myself, and making a few choice comments. Yes. Or people who just stride along and they see a bit of litter in front of them and they just kick it. No respect, no sense of responsibility. And so I'm turning this around on the rioters. Many of you people have a total lack of responsibility, a total lack of understanding of the consequences of your actions. Responsibility, owning up to your mistakes, consequences. This is something that seems to be very fashionable to ignore. But social media, which of course played a very big role in this, in stirring up hatred, far-right sentiment. This is a factor we did not have in, say, the 1970s. Then the only way these riots were triggered across major urban centres was possibly because they were seen on the news. So it didn't flare up quite as simultaneously. I mean, we had all the rioting and fires in London. When was that, darling? Do you remember?
No, it was a little while ago now, wasn't it? Can't remember exactly.
Yeah, the last. And I'm not sure whether there was a heat wave then, but yet again, there was a major spark, which there always is. And I'm sure, just like then, there were WhatsApp groups, Instagram. Did WhatsApp even exist back then? I don't know. But basically, mobile phone messaging was a major part of organising these events too quickly for the police to respond. I'm afraid, and I'm sure many people are going to wag their fingers at me for freedom of speech and liberty. But in these situations of mobile phone networks, being made to limit a lot of these social media sites in areas where the rioting is taking place. I'm pretty sure they can do that. So why don't they? In fact, maybe it was done. I do not know. If anybody has any information, please let me know. You can whine and cry all you like about freedom of speech, but when these people are organising, yeah, let's target a hotel with immigrants in it, and they get all their mates along, so there's a couple of hundred instead of maybe just an isolated group of a dozen, that is a serious risk to the lives of these immigrants and to the lives of the staff at this hotel. I won't even bother talking about the property damage because fuck that. Don't give a shit about that. That's not important. I mean, in some ways, if they burn down a derelict house, that's urban demolition, and hopefully something better will be rebuilt. Try and see the good in every situation. But when I was, this is the Gen Xer moan again. When I was young, there was in Needham Market alone, which was a very small town. It's not as small now. In Needham Market alone, there was Scouts, there was Girl Guides, there was Boys Brigade, there was a community centre, there was a youth club, a community library that held events. There were sporting events organised by the council. Needham Market still has its very own youth football team. Very minor league, I think. I don't know, I don't follow. And yes, we are seeing far more community events these days. But Needham Market is a privileged, overwhelmingly white English small town. And still, even Ipswich is still overwhelmingly white, but not overprivileged. There are services if you look for them, but in places like Rotherham, Stockport, from what I hear, they're mostly like war zones. Drug deals on every corner. Yes, we see that here. I see that round here, and I live in a relatively affluent part of the town centre. I mean, literally, you go down that way, you've got Immigration Central. It's a low rent area. You have many ethnic shops and cafes. There's a marvellous Portuguese cafe because Ipswich has always had a very large Portuguese community. You've got halal butchers, stuff like that. And there's always been a major Caribbean and Polish presence as well. The Romanians are a newer factor. But, England's always been a melting pot. Problem is sometimes that melting pot, when other factors are thrown in, can be very volatile. I dread to think what people living in these areas that are prone to rioting, you must live in fear. You must be sitting in your house thinking, not my window, please, not my window, please, please don't target me, please don't target me. And maybe half the time you're thinking, well, maybe I should just join in and go with the flow. That's understandable. And Starmer was talking big. All those who blah, blah, blah will face the blah, blah, blah full force of the blah, 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 blah law, and then I am a robot politician. Blah, 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 blah. The same spouting bullshit you hear from the Tories. Yeah, I voted for Labour because I wanted the Tories out, because I'd got to the stage where anything was better than the Tories. And until we change the voting system, because we do not have proportional representation, then the two-party system will continue when at the moment there doesn't seem to be much to choose between them. Now, our local MP, who's Labour now, talks the talk, and his heart seems to be in the right place. He makes a lot of sense. He's got a lot of charm and charisma as well, I think. But he is relatively new to politics. He probably doesn't have the power to change that much, and to a certain extent, he has to toe the line of his masters and mistresses. Hope he doesn't have a mistress. I don't even know if he's married, actually. Not alleging anything. No allegations at all. It was a joke. Yeah. I mean, this English habit of summer riots is so prevalent. There's even a band that included the fact we've had 3 hot nights in succession. The riot season is here again. I think this took him a couple of weeks, didn't it, dear?
Yeah.
But all it needed was the flashpoint. You cannot prevent the flashpoint, but you can put systems and support in place to prevent it from happening so regularly. And I'm not talking about more police on our streets, harsher punishments. I am talking about the reintroduction of youth groups, the reintroduction of proper community services, the reintroduction of proper housing for the poor, the vulnerable, the legalisation of drugs and regulation of them. All these things could help prevent these things from happening as often as they do. You will never stop idiots from rioting. Never. It would take an extreme shift in human instinct, which I can't see happening for a very long time without some kind of genetic engineering or conditioning, which is so horribly wrong that I don't even want to go there. I admire those who want to change the way people think, but unfortunately you are tiny drops in an ocean of normal human behaviour, a lot of which I think is quite abnormal, but there you go. I am just a tiny drop myself. And I am guilty of aggressive reactions, especially when drinking. I am guilty of feeling angry about the state of the country I live in. Have I been guilty of breaking the law? Not lately. I've done a few grey area things, I will not go into details, but nothing that harms another human being. Not for over 30 years now. I've had a few amusing drunken incidents. I distinctly remember many years ago, I think it was not long after I'd basically had my parole, we're talking 30 years ago here, restrictions lessened so I could go out on licensed premises. Of course, I went out for a night with old friends, didn't I? I still thank those old friends involved in those times who looked after me, welcomed me back to Ipswich, and just didn't care what I'd done. They knew I was Howard. That acceptance was still heartwarming. And I got rather drunk in the Black Horse on Black Horse Lane in Ipswich, I seem to recall. And I did the silly thing that drunks do, of playing with the traffic cone, and I threw it in the road just as a cop car came round the corner. And everyone was like, oh no. It was manned by 2 police officers. One was a policeman officer. Hot Fuzz, love that movie. And the other was a female police officer. And I apologised profusely in a very drunken fashion. The female police officer was grinning at me, but the bloke was not having none of it. And I basically put the cone back where I found it and wobbled a bit and grinned. She's grinning away, and I'm like, oh, sorry, officer, trying to shake his hand. He was having none of it, but she thought I was hilarious. And we went on our way, and my mates were like, you dickhead. You know, any incidents since then that's worthy of note and not made up? Well, I've usually been on the other side, to be quite honest. Like when about 7 years ago I got mugged outside my local corner shop. I still have a scar somewhere up here from that. Although I think describing it as a mugging was stretching the definition of what I believe it really was. There'd been a group of troublesome teenagers that had always hung about since they were pre-teens. One of whom I once caught going into my garage. Basically, I hadn't been down there for a while, and they'd managed to break the lock. It was only a pathetic just turn handle with no real other security, and were using it as their own little drug den. And I literally chased one of them out because at the time I was doing some work on the concrete outside with an angle grinder and a blunted reenactment axe. He just walked past me with an angle grinder and an axe, walked into his garage and was looking around obviously for his drug stash. And I was like, what are you doing? Totally ignored me. I said, what are you doing? And then I got up with the angle grinder and I put the angle grinder down. Then I got up and I had the axe in my hand. I literally waved it in his face and said, fuck off. And they noted me from then on. They quite often would be messing about out back. I'd call the police occasionally, wouldn't I, darling? And then one night while my partner was at work, it was a Sunday evening, I'd already drank 1 bottle of wine. It must have been 7 o'clock in the evening, I think, wasn't it, done?
Yeah, it was only early, wasn't it?
And basically it was foggy, because this was in winter, wasn't it? Mm-hmm. I walked down the corner shop. There's a bunch of them hanging around outside. And I noticed they had their hoods up and they were wearing face masks. I think there was only 2 or 3 of them, wasn't there? Mm-hmm. And I was just happy drunk. Went in the shop, came out, and they were standing either side of the pavement, and like a stupid arsehole, they nodded at me and I walked through them, and that's when they attacked me from both sides. I went down on the floor, covered my head and face, started yelling for all I was worth. They didn't get anything, so I don't think this was actually a mugging. And I'll be honest, I think they were as frightened as I was. Because if you're not frightened in that situation, there's something wrong with it. And to be honest, they didn't really do that much damage, did they, darling? I mean, the initial blow to the side of the face, like that, was probably the most damaging one. And that was the scar I got was from the pavement. and they ran off. Unfortunately, they don't have CCTV outside the shop. You know, and two coppers come round and remarked on the amount of reenactment gear lying around, and we discussed riot shield tactics as opposed to Viking shield wall tactics, which was fun, wasn't it, dear? Oh, they were lovely, bless them. But they never really found them or charged them because they moved on shortly afterwards. One of the reasons they moved on shortly afterwards was because I got drunk, noticed they were down there, went back home, put on my full Viking reenactment gear, spear, shield and helm, and started waving it about and threatening them, going, come on. And then the owner of my local store, bless him, Sam, he's ex-British Army, he is a sound as a pound, Sam, isn't he? Mm. He came out and he was like, Howard, go home now. And eventually he chased me off. They were jeering. But you never saw him hang out outside about that shop again. And they moved on shortly afterwards. I think they may have thought twice about hanging around in an area where a roving Viking warrior was drunkenly threatening them. Allegedly. So, yeah. At the end of the day, I think just behaving like these people have done in the UK just labels you as an animal. And if you behave like an animal, you get treated like one. I have begun to learn this over the years. Some aspects of my behaviour have been similarly aggressive, and it does me no favours as an individual. It closes doors, it lessens your opportunities, it makes you seen as a less trustworthy individual. And I, over the years, have worked hard to avoid snap judgments. I'm never going to avoid them completely, nor am I ever, I suppose, unless I give up drinking, but what else do I do to control my hyperactivity? It's always worked apart from in stressful situations. So I prefer the solution is to not very often and without good trusted company go out drinking at night. There you go. Solutions, people. Yeah, I just thought this has turned into a half an hour ramble, hasn't it? Well, that is my thoughts on the situation in the UK. And once again, I emphasise, if any of you watching are in the affected areas, stay safe, watch your back, and don't bloody join in. Okay?